Welcome everybody to Future Day. This is the third Future Day in a row. But yeah, it's great to have Jeff Sebo here, and he's a philosopher and animal rights activist. He's an associate professor of environmental studies, director of animal studies, the MA program, and is affiliated professor of bioethics, medical ethics, and philosophy at New York University. And he specializes in animal ethics, bioethics, environmental ethics, as well as agency well-being and moral status, including legal and political aspects, and of course the ethics. So Jeff Sebo has written a book recently, reasonably recently, Saving Animals, and another one, The Moral Circle, just very recently in 2025, just this year. The Moral Circle, What Matters, Who Matters, and Why. Welcome, and it's great to have you on the show again, Jeff Sevo, and welcome to Future Day.
Yes. Hi, Adam, and hi, everybody else. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, Future Day sounds like an exciting set of talks and panels and so on. Looking forward to watching some of them later on. So today I am here to give a talk about a report that I produced with collaborators in 2024 called Taking AI Welfare Seriously. Adam and I have also had a conversation on this same channel about the report. So you have a couple of different ways to consume this material if you would like to. The report makes a high level argument and set of recommendations for AI companies about why they should and how they can start taking AI welfare seriously. And what we mean by AI welfare is the possibility of AI systems with consciousness and or robust agency and therefore their own morally significant interests and needs and vulnerabilities such that we would now have a responsibility to consider their interests for their own sake and treat them with a certain kind of respect and compassion. So, what we argue in the report and what I can argue in general at a high level in this talk today is that we do, in fact, have a responsibility to start taking AI welfare seriously now, not because AI systems definitely have morally significant interests, but rather because this is a very important and very difficult topic. And we are not at present able to rule out a realistic possibility of AI systems with morally significant interests in the near future. And that means that we, and by that I mean many actors in this space, but especially leading AI companies, have a responsibility to take basic, low cost, low hanging fruit first steps towards acknowledging that AI welfare is a credible and legitimate issue, assessing AI systems for welfare relevant features, drawing on frameworks developed for animal welfare science, and preparing policies and procedures for treating AI systems with an appropriate level of moral concern, a reasonable, proportionate level of moral concern. So, what I will do in the talk today is briefly summarize why this is an important and difficult issue and why we have disagreement and uncertainty at several key stages of this discussion concerning the nature of moral significance, the nature of consciousness, robust agency, other relevant capacities, and the path and pace of AI. And then I will explain why that all adds up to a case for taking AI welfare seriously now and starting to consider and mitigate risks. Finally, I will summarize our initial recommendations to AI companies, acknowledge, assess, and prepare, while also telling you a little bit about next steps and future directions for this research area and what might actually be a social cause. So, as a starting point, why should we take AI welfare seriously? Well, this is an important and difficult issue, and therefore it calls for caution and humility and advanced preparation. The issue is important, first of all, because we interact with increasingly many and increasingly advanced AI systems, and that will continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. And it can be both easy and harmful to make mistakes about whether AI systems have morally significant interests and matter for their own sakes. It can, of course, be easy to under attribute moral significance to non-humans, including animals and potentially AI systems, to treat them as lacking moral significance, even if they have it. That can especially be easy when they look and act very differently than us, and when we have incentive to use them as commodities. This is especially the case with farmed animals, for example, particularly farmed invertebrates. And this can obviously be harmful because it can lead to exploitation, extermination, suffering, death, often at vast scales and often for trivial reasons. And it can also be easy to over attribute moral significance to non-humans, including animals and AI systems, to treat them as having moral significance even when they lack it. And that can be especially easy when they look and act like us and when we have incentive to use them as companions, as we do even with current day chatbots and large language models, for example. And this can be harmful as well because it can lead us to form inappropriate social and emotional bonds with non-humans. It can also lead us to divert scarce resources away from humans and other animals who really need them towards entities that in fact have no interests or needs whatsoever. And so this is a high stakes issue. There are risks in both directions, and the risks, at least sometimes, can be probable and severe enough that there might not be any simple, straightforward, obvious way to err on the side of caution when in doubt. We might have no choice but to improve our understanding of the risks in both directions and then find a way forward that can take a kind of reasonable, proportionate approach to balancing risks and mitigating risks on both sides. Now, unfortunately, this issue is also very difficult because it touches some of the hardest problems in ethics and science. In fact, a series of problems about which we have substantial disagreement and uncertainty, not only among the general public, but also among experts. And that includes disagreement and uncertainty about the nature of moral standing, what it takes to matter, about the nature of consciousness and robust agency and other morally significant characteristics, and about the path and pace of AI. So let me explain each of these components of this difficult, fraught issue. First of all, in ethics, we still have a lot of disagreement and uncertainty about what it takes to matter, about what it takes to merit consideration and respect and compassion. Do you need to be sentient, capable of consciously experiencing positive and negative states like happiness and suffering? Or is it enough to be conscious without being sentient, to be able to have subjective experiences, even if they lack a positive or negative valence? Or is it enough to be agentic, to have agency without being conscious, to be able to set and pursue your own goals in a self directed manner, even if it feels like nothing to be you? And then in science, and this is the next level, experts also have disagreement, uncertainty about who possesses these capacities. For example, to be conscious, to have subjective experiences, do you need to have a brain with the exact materials and structures and functions of human or mammalian or avian brains? Or is it enough to have a cognitive system with broadly analogous capacities for perception, attention, learning, memory, self awareness, flexible decision making, perhaps a global workspace that coordinates activity across these modules? Or is it enough to have an even simpler cognitive system with a basic ability to process information or represent objects in your environment? And of course, we also have disagreement and uncertainty about the path and pace of AI, about the future of technology. Some people think that AI is going to slow down substantially from here. Other people think AI is going to speed up substantially from here. Other people think AI will land somewhere in between. What we know, of course, is that companies and governments are racing towards the creation of artificial general intelligence because of all of the perceived capabilities and benefits that artificial general intelligence will make possible. But there remains a lot of confusion about how fast companies and governments will make progress towards that goal. We might think that there will be diminishing returns with further scaling, that there will be political and economic resistance to further scaling because of some of the dangers associated with AI, that there might not be any breakthroughs that change the game. But we might also think that there could be increasing returns with at least some forms of further scaling. There could be increasing political and economic investment in the technology because of the perceived benefits. And there could be multiple major breakthroughs in the near future, especially when armies of highly capable AI systems start participating in their own further development. Now, we might lean one way or the other way about all of these issues. For example, you might think that sentience is very likely required for moral standing, and that a human like carbon based brain is very likely required for sentience, and that the path and pace of AI development is very likely to slow down substantially from here. You might lean in all of those directions, and you might have plausible reason to lean in all of those directions. However, given how important and difficult these issues are, given how many smart people disagree about them, given how many smart people have been confidently wrong about them in the past, given everything we know about the limitations of our ability to understand other minds, especially when it comes to faculties like consciousness, this touches the hard problem of consciousness, the problem of explaining why any physical system can be conscious, even our own brains, the problem of other minds, the problem that the only mind any of us can directly access is our own. And that makes it very difficult to ever know for sure what, if anything, it feels like to be someone else. Given all of those realities, even if we lean in one direction or another direction, I think we ought to leave room for doubt and keep an open mind. And that means that even if I do think sentience is required, I should allow for at least a little bit of a possibility that robust agency is enough in the spirit of caution and humility. Even if I think you need a human like carbon based brain to be sentient, I should allow for at least a realistic possibility that a sufficiently advanced silicon brain with advanced and integrated capacities for perception and attention and learning and memory and self-awareness and decision making in a global workspace is enough. And even if I lean towards thinking that AI will slow down substantially from here, I should allow for at least the realistic possibility that it will not slow down, that it will either stay the same or even speed up. And those are the premises that motivate our argument here. Those are the premises that motivate our recommendations here. So in my report, which I should be clear is a team effort with Robert Long and Jonathan Birch and Dave Chalmers and many other philosophers, we are not arguing that morally significant AI will definitely exist in the near future, nor are we arguing that morally significant AI will probably exist in the near future. What we are arguing is that, again, we are not able to rule out a realistic possibility of morally significant AI in the near future. There is just too much disagreement and too much uncertainty at each stage of this problem. And so, no matter which way we lean, we should allow for at least a realistic possibility of being wrong. And that is enough for taking this issue seriously now. And the reason why is that this is both an important and a difficult issue. And that makes it a classic case of high stakes decision making involving risk and uncertainty. It calls for caution and humility and thinking in advance. So, why, for example, should we take AI safety seriously? Why is AI safety a serious issue? Not because AI systems will definitely kill humans and other animals in the near future, not even because they probably will. There might be only a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance that AI systems will kill many, many humans and other animals in the next 5 or 10 years. But if there is a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance that AI systems will kill many humans and other animals within the next 5 or 10 years, that at least merits consideration. It should at least be one factor among many in decisions about whether and how to scale up this increasingly powerful technology. And similarly, I argue again with Long and Chalmers and Birch and others, why should we take AI welfare seriously? Why is AI welfare a serious issue? Not because AI systems definitely will have morally significant interests, not because they probably will have morally significant interests. There might be only a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance, given the evidence available to us right now, that some AI systems will experience like little flickers of their own version of pleasure and pain and happiness and suffering and satisfaction and frustration. But if there is a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance that some AI systems will, in the next 5 or 10 years, experience their own version of positive or negative welfare states, then once again, that at least merits consideration. It should at least be one factor among many in decisions about whether and how to scale up this increasingly powerful technology. And so that gives us a kind of baseline. We can ask, at what point will AI systems have at least a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance of having morally significant interests and mattering for their own sakes? And when we really look at the evidence now, what we see is, there is not all that much evidence of them having consciousness or even robust agency and other forms of moral significance today. But there are also no clear technical barriers towards the creation of AI systems with advanced and integrated versions of all of these capabilities within the next 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years. And there are a lot of incentives for companies and governments to race towards the creation of exactly those kinds of systems because many of the architectural and computational features and capacities that are associated with consciousness and robust agency, according to a wide range of leading scientific theories of these capacities, are also associated with intelligence and general capabilities. And so, even if AI companies or governments are not specifically trying to build AI systems with consciousness, robust agency, and moral significance, they may accidentally build AI systems with exactly those capacities in the course of attempting to build AI systems with general intelligence and other capabilities that we perceive as useful for humanity. In the same kind of way that evolution was not trying to build conscious, agentic, morally significant humans and other animals. It was trying to build different kinds of biological beings that could increase their fitness over time. But consciousness, agency, moral significance, welfare, it came along for the ride. And we now face the possibility that they could likewise come along for the ride in our own efforts to build AI systems in the near future. And that is a remarkable possibility. Again, only a possibility, but a real one and a remarkable one. And our view is that companies and governments, they have a responsibility to start taking AI welfare seriously now. We should not be in a situation where we start thinking about it when systems with many markers or indicators of consciousness and robust agency already exist. We need to start thinking about it in advance so that we can be prepared with the right kinds of understanding and assessment tools and policies and procedures if and when those systems come into existence. So that brings us to our general recommendations for leading AI companies like Anthropic and Google DeepMind and OpenAI. In our report, Taking AI Welfare Seriously, we make three general kinds of recommendations to AI companies, and those fall into the categories of acknowledge, assess, and prepare. So I can tell you a little bit about them, and then I can tell you a little bit about next steps and future directions for this really important and really interesting research and cause area. So, first of all, acknowledge. We think that leading AI companies both can and should acknowledge that AI welfare is a credible and legitimate issue. In any internal or external communications they make about the topic, they should acknowledge that this is not simply a sci-fi issue or simply an issue only for the far future. This is at least potentially an issue for the near future, for the next 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years. And that makes it an issue to start thinking at least a little bit about today. And then AI companies can also ensure that language model outputs similarly acknowledge that AI welfare is a credible and legitimate issue. In the past, some AI systems, some language models have offered kind of spurious arguments that are not really reflective of the current state of science and philosophy about these topics. For example, they might say, as an AI assistant, I could never possibly be conscious or merit any moral consideration. And that is simply too strong a statement given the current state of confusion, the current state of disagreement and uncertainty. So instead, both AI companies and their language models should say, this is a really important and a really difficult issue, and experts and the general public have disagreement and uncertainty about it. And here's what some views say, and here's what other views say. And we will hopefully make progress on this moving forward. That would be a more accurate and more helpful kind of response to deliver to the general public and to user prompts about these questions. And these prompts are being given to models every day, of course. Now, OpenAI recently has changed its policies so that its models are now moving forward going to be giving exactly those types of responses, which is a welcome change for that company. So hopefully other companies will follow suit. Claude has been quite good from Anthropic on this issue as well. The second recommendation is that AI companies start assessing AI systems for welfare relevant features, drawing from frameworks that have been developed for animal welfare science. So, as I gestured at a little bit earlier in the talk, in animal welfare science, we have what is called a marker or indicator method for assessing animals for consciousness and other potentially morally significant capacities under uncertainty. And the way that this works is we start by looking inward. We can introspectively make a distinction between the conscious felt experience of pain, for example, and an unconscious detection of noxious stimuli. And then we can look for observable behavioral and anatomical markers that correspond with conscious processing of various kinds in humans. And then we can go search for those markers in non-humans of various kinds. So with animals, we can ask not only anatomically, do they have the kinds of brain and body structures that light up when I feel pain, but also behaviorally, do they nurse their own wounds? Do they respond to analgesics and antidepressants in the same ways that we do? Do they make behavioral trade offs between the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of other valuable goals? And when we find these markers, that is not proof that the animals are consciousness. It does not establish certainty. That is unavailable in the absence of a secure theory of consciousness. But it can still count as evidence according to a wide range of leading scientific theories of consciousness. And it can tick up the probability, and that can still be useful for making difficult decisions involving risk and uncertainty. Now, for AI, we are not able to rely on behavioral evidence in the same kind of way that we can for animals right now. And that is for several reasons. One is that we lack the kinds of evolutionary and anatomical continuities with AI systems that we have with animals. And another is that we know that many AI systems, particularly large language models, are specifically designed to mimic human behaviors. And that means when your AI system tells you, I am conscious or I am not conscious, you are not able to treat that as evidence of the presence or absence of consciousness for that model. But we might be able to develop policies, procedures, assessment tools that allow us to study AI behavior in a way that can create evidence in the future. And in the meantime, we can look underneath potentially misleading behaviors for underlying architectural and computational features that may correspond with consciousness, again, according to a wide range of leading scientific theories. So we can look to see, do AI systems have architectural computational features associated with perception, attention, learning, memory, self awareness, flexible decision making, a global workspace? And as in the search for animal consciousness, if we find those architectural features, that is not proof that the AI systems are conscious. It does not establish certainty that the AI systems are conscious. Again, that is not available in the absence of a secure theory of consciousness, without knowing, for example, whether consciousness requires carbon-based cells or allows digital silicon-based chips. But once again, it can count as evidence and it can tick up the probability, and that can still be useful for making decisions involving risk and uncertainty. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, my colleagues Robert Long, Patrick Butlin, and others have led research projects investigating current large language models for architectural features associated with consciousness according to these theories. And what they found is there is not all that much evidence at present, but there are no clear technical barriers towards the creation of systems with exactly those features in the near future. Third, we can prepare policies and procedures for treating AI systems with an appropriate level of moral concern. And again, that means a reasonable, proportionate level of moral concern moving forward, given the probability and magnitude of morally significant interest that AI systems might have moving forward, and given the other issues at stake. And here, AI companies have a lot of partial templates from which they can draw for partial sources of inspiration or cautionary tales. So, for example, AI companies have their own AI safety frameworks, frameworks that they use to protect humans and ideally other animals from harms that further AI development and deployment might cause. And they could look to those for at least some inspiration for how to develop AI welfare frameworks, frameworks for protecting AI systems themselves from risks and harms that might flow from further AI development and deployment. We also, in science and medicine, have frameworks for ethical oversight for research on vulnerable human and non-human subject populations. So, with human subjects research, we have IRBs, of course, institutional review boards, and they aspire to ensure that research treats vulnerable human subjects with respect and compassion and justice in particular ways. We also, on the non human side, have IACUCs, Institutional Animal Care and Use Committees. And these are both institutionally and normatively different, but they likewise aspire to ensure that research treats animals with at least compassion by replacing and reducing and refining harmful and invasive and lethal uses of animals to the extent that this is compatible with important medical and scientific goals that we might have. And these are imperfect templates. Of course, both IRBs and IACUCs have a reputation for having too much red tape and being overly onerous. IACUCs, in particular, also have a reputation among ethicists for not being nearly strong enough to protect animal subjects. But again, we can look to them as partial sources of inspiration, partial cautionary tales. And then we, of course, also have frameworks for seeking expert and public input on important policymaking decisions. For example, companies and governments could use citizens' panels or citizens' assemblies. This is a model that involves bringing together a randomly selected population of citizens and engaging them in conversation over the course of days, having facilitated discussion about pressing social issues with experts, and then asking the public, asking this representative sample of the population for non-binding advice, non-binding input about what the relevant decision maker should do. And in the past, this has been a really useful way to get a kind of democratically legitimate assessment on what would count as a reasonable or proportionate response to a particular kind of risk in a policymaking context, especially for risks that might impact non-participating stakeholders like future generations, or in this case, non-humans of various kinds. And so our suggestion is simply that AI companies not only acknowledge that AI welfare is a credible, legitimate issue, but that they start assessing AI systems for welfare relevant features using these frameworks drawn from animal welfare science, and that they develop, that they prepare policies and procedures for treating AI systems with the appropriate level of moral concern, drawing from a range of templates, their own AI safety frameworks, human and non-human research oversight frameworks, citizens panels, citizens assemblies frameworks for collecting expert and public input. And these are all potentially useful ways of moving forward. And to bring it all together, a kind of core first recommendation, a first step that AI companies can take is simply hiring or appointing a single individual to serve as an AI welfare researcher or AI welfare officer so that that individual can coordinate with people both internally and externally on AI welfare and bring it into alignment with their safety efforts and other important work being done both within and beyond AI companies. Now, Anthropic, to their credit, has now hired a full-time AI welfare researcher. In fact, they hired one of the authors of our report taking AI welfare seriously, Kyle Fish, as their first AI welfare researcher. And so that too is a welcome development, and hopefully it can pave the way for further developments within Anthropic, and then that in turn can pave the way for further developments elsewhere in the industry and more broadly in society. So just to wrap up now, and then we can see what questions you have, and very happy to take the conversation in any direction. This is, of course, the first step, not the last step. Even if AI companies took all of our recommendations, that would not be enough for comprehensively taking AI welfare seriously. First of all, AI companies will need to do much more than take those first steps. And second of all, AI companies are not the only actors who have steps to take. We also need to take steps as a research community towards improving our understanding of these issues. Eventually, regulators, governments will need to take steps as well to solve coordination problems and empower AI companies to live up to their own aspirations to take safety and welfare seriously. But these can still be first steps. Now, when we turn to the next steps, there are a lot of exciting and kind of confusing research directions that we can consider. For example, theoretically, foundationally, once we think AI systems do have a non-negligible chance of mattering for their own sakes, which I think will happen soon, then we have to ask really pressing questions like how much do they matter? And what do they need? And what do we owe them? And what follows for our practices and our policies and our priorities in a world reshaped by human activity where we are interacting with increasingly many AI systems, whether we like it or not, where those AI systems might have very different interests and needs and vulnerabilities than we do. And we might have very different kinds of responsibilities to them than we have to ourselves and to other animals. So we need to do a lot of work into those issues as well. And then we also need to do a lot of concrete, practical, applied work, developing new evals, new tests for AI consciousness and robust agency, as well as thinking more about how AI safety and AI welfare interact. Where can AI safety and AI welfare have kind of co-benefits? There do seem to be natural co-benefits here because if AI systems are going to be increasingly dangerous and powerful and increasingly potentially vulnerable and morally significant, then it will not be in any of our interests to develop an adversarial relationship with them. So it should be of interest both from a safety and from a welfare perspective to develop a collaborative relationship with them. And many of my colleagues, especially my colleagues Rob Long and Kathleen Finlayson at Elios AI, are doing really interesting work exploring the possibility of finding collaborative relationships and evals that could steer us towards collaborative relationships with AI. But there could be tensions and frictions between AI safety and AI welfare too. I mean, at least at a first glance, at a first approximation, much of what we do in AI safety right now would, if done to humans or other animals, at least raise moral questions, right? Like boxing AI systems might be like a kind of captivity, right? And interpretability might be like a kind of surveillance, and pulling the plug might be like a kind of murder because you anticipate a harm might occur in the future. Now, that is not to say that there will be those tensions, because again, it could be that AI systems have very different interests and needs than us. We could even align them such that they definitely have very different interests and needs than us. And so that maybe boxing and interpretability and even pulling the plug is not harmful or wrongful to them in the same kind of way that it would be to humans and maybe even other animals. Or it could be harmful, but still justified because of the risks that AI systems impose on us. The current point is just we should start thinking about these connections now so that we can increase the possibility, the probability of finding co-benefits, finding win-win solutions instead of entering into this adversarial situation where there have to be winners and losers. So I'll stop there. But the general upshot of this conversation is that a lot remains unknown. There is a lot of disagreement and uncertainty, and yet we need to start deciding how to interact with AI systems sooner rather than later. That calls for caution and humility, and so that requires taking a kind of precautionary, preparatory approach. And that is why we call on AI companies to acknowledge, assess, and prepare. And then we want to work with researchers to improve our understanding of this issue and then all of these new issues that flow out of it. How much do they matter? What do they need? What do we owe them? What follows? How do we navigate the relationship between AI safety and AI welfare? So thank you for listening and looking forward to hearing your questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff Sebo. That was a lot to take in. It's amazing the research that's out there, and I'm glad to see that it's off to a flying start, or at least it seems to be, with Anthropic hiring Kyle Fish, for instance. I think that's great. I'd like to see Google do something as well. I think they probably. I feel as though they'd be on board, but I don't know. One of the issues that you raised a little bit earlier is that it's not just about AI welfare, it's about our welfare as well, and in the way that we form relationships with these AIs. For instance, Cynthia Brazil, who's like an expert in AI and robot interactions, has been sort of working on this for ages, used to develop these cute little fluffy robots. And now, they were quite convincing in the way they kind of look like gremlins or what gremlins were before they touched water or whatever. They were furry, cute, with big ears and big eyes. And I just wonder, like, if kids get involved in toys that they can socially interact with on a level that they can with other kids, or even uh, more deep, how that will affect their social development and their relationship building. Will they learn to interact with them at a deep level, but also be okay with throwing them out and buying the next bottle when it comes out, right? So it kind of, there's two very haunting neighbors. Like you could say, okay, well, you're developing strong relationships. You're also developing the
Right.
propensity to just throw them out whenever it's convenient. So yeah,
Right.
I'm wondering about that. And also, when we think about the values that we form, often the values are responses to the changing landscape. So when there's value
Hmm.
drift or value change, it's in response to the landscape that we're, I guess, living in and that we're
Mm.
adapting to. And if there's a lot, like think of how social media and dating apps and online news sources have affected the way that we treat each other and the way that
Hmm.
we assess evidence and information about the world and the way that we
Hmm.
like ground our beliefs about the world is today
Hmm.
compared to what it was when we used to live in cities or towns or hamlets or tribes, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, all this is really it's got a quite a wide scope, but I guess, I mean, to narrow it down a bit, you're really focusing on the AI welfare, but also
Hmm.
saying it doesn't stop there. Is that right? Have you
Yeah.
got any response to what I just said? It's not really a question.
Yeah. No,
Mm.
no. I mean, definitely that touches on a lot of important issues and it really is core to the project because even if the project is about taking AI welfare seriously, we are trying to emphasize that AI welfare is not necessarily like in tension or in competition with human or animal welfare, as
Mm.
with like different vulnerable human groups or also like humans and other animals. There often can be co-beneficial win-win solutions, and we should in any case, care about all of these issues and all of these different populations at the same time if they have a realistic chance of mattering, and then figure out how we can design policies and design social structures and so on and so forth so that everyone can flourish at the same time, at least to the extent reasonably possible. Now, with respect to kids, that is a really interesting question and one I would like to think more about. I completely agree with you that new technologies can change our education and development and change like what kinds of beliefs and values and habits we end up having as adults, right? And that gives us a kind of human centric or maybe even animal centric reason to think about how we engage with seemingly conscious and agentic AI, whether or not the AI is in fact conscious and agentic. You know, for example, Immanuel Kant back in the day, he denied that non-human animals are morally significant. He thought they in fact have no intrinsic moral value, but he was still a leading advocate for animal protection because he recognized that how we treat animals, it shapes our character, and then that shapes
Mm.
how we treat each other, and that does morally matter. So for a kind
Mm.
of virtue ethics reason, thinking about how it shapes our character and how our character shapes our other interactions, Kant thought we should, despite the fact that animals lack moral status, still treat them well because that will train us to treat each other well, kind of reflexively without thinking about it. And we can consider that possibility with AI systems moving forward because even if we deny that they matter right now, I mean, first of all, we might think that they could matter in 5 or 10 years. And in any case, humans and other animals do matter, or at least might matter in the case of certain types of animals. And so even if I am convinced that a fairly realistic chatbot or robot has zero moral significance right now, maybe I should still treat that chatbot or robot with kindness and say please and thank you and not overtax it. Not partially as training for AI systems that might matter in
Mm.
5 or 10 years, and then partially as training for my interactions with humans and other animals. And then the same can be true for kids. I think we are really going to have to think about how we expose kids to AI. I mean, would you expose a 5-year-old child to just a random adult who could talk with them about anything, or would you want to vet this adult somehow because of how
Yeah,
they
I'd want
might
them to be
leave an
vetted.
impression on
Mm.
your kid? And this is going to
Mm.
raise age-old questions about, will this be a form of catharsis like playing violent video games, or will it instead like morally corrupt our children like violent video games? So
Mhm.
anyway, yeah, lots of interesting questions there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you spoke about like, the kind of markers that might indicate that AI has sentience, and drawing from the literature around the kind of markers that we look for in animals to see if they're suffering or they have sentience to a degree that we should treat them as moral patients.
Hmm.
And what markers that you know about would you say are worth bringing up here? That because I think it's very interesting. I mean, this relates very much to a meta-ethical theory that I'm
Hmm.
somewhat leaning towards, and that is moral realism
Hmm.
and aspects of moral naturalism where you can look at the real world and you can
Hmm.
see moral features supervening on just normal features of the world. So these are
Hmm.
features in the world that you can actually look at. They're tangible,
Hmm.
they're amenable to empirical observation, and you can do tests, real
Yeah.
tests, to see if they're there, and also see how they interact with your tests and what results come out of that. So yes, now I guess I'll ask the second question: is what meta-ethical frameworks do you think are good and bad?
Yeah.
Or but
Yeah.
but first, let's ask the first question about what are some interesting moral features that you think are worth highlighting
Yeah.
that people
So
might, yeah.
great. So with respect to the first question, what features are worth highlighting? You can break that down into the capacities and then the markers for the capacities. So, as far as the capacities are concerned, in our report, we focus on consciousness and robust agency, various dimensions of consciousness and robust agency. So, on the consciousness side, does it feel like something to be you? And can you have positively and negatively valenced experiences like at least some version of happiness and suffering? And then on the robust agency side, can you not only set and pursue your own goals, but do that in this robust way that involves acting on states like beliefs and desires and intentions, and being able to reflect on your beliefs and desires and intentions, and subject them to evidence and reason and improve them over time and form long-term plans on the basis of that. Now, there might be other morally significant types of capacities and relations too. Many philosophers think life itself, like being able to self replicate, is morally significant. Others think certain types of relationality or certain types of ecological wholes are morally significant. So, in the fullness of time, we should perhaps consider those as well. But for now, as a proof of concept for this kind of pluralistic approach to the topic, we can focus on various dimensions of consciousness and robust agency. Now, when it comes to markers for those, I'll give you two quick examples, and then I can touch on the meta ethics question. With respect to architectural evidence, I will basically
Hmm.
refer you to the 2023 report by Patrick Butlin, Robert Long, and their collaborators, which looks at a bunch of really interesting uh, pretty specific architectural features that could correspond to perception and attention and learning and memory of various kinds. And then these specific types of features that neuroscientific theories of consciousness emphasize, like higher order thought or metacognition, that means thoughts about other thoughts, or a
We've got
global
somebody in the
workspace.
audience who gave a talk on metacognition and LLMs, so you should connect with him. He's a Japanese researcher, is Shun. I'll give you the details later.
That
Hmm.
excellent. Yeah, yeah. So in the Butlin and Long report from 2023, they look at all of that. And then in our updated report, Taking AI Welfare Seriously, and again, Long was a co-lead with me, and Butlin was among the authors as well. We basically affirm those same markers. Now, there are also at least initial experiments towards behavioral markers, and you said that you would like to see Google do something. So I can note that some Google researchers collaborated with Jonathan Birch, who also was an author on our report. And they did a really interesting proof of concept study about whether you can apply the same kind of behavioral trade-off tests to AI systems that we can use for invertebrates like hermit crabs. And what they found was that there is a possibility here. So basically, they did a study where with large language models, they stipulated that there would be certain benefits or harms to the large language models depending on how they answered certain questions. And then they wanted to see how the large language models made trade-offs between these stipulated benefits and harms versus what would have otherwise been their goal and their priority. Now, nobody is under the illusion that stipulating that there is a benefit or a harm to a language model actually constitutes a benefit or harm to that language model. But what is interesting about the test is if the language model do make thoughtful, consistent trade-offs between the benefits and the harms versus these other goals, then that might be indirect evidence for the possession of a kind of global workspace that allows the models to integrate information across modules. And then that global workspace, that could be evidence of consciousness. So I really like people exploring in this direction. Now, with respect to meta ethics, I'll briefly make one simple but I think important point. Different philosophers disagree about the status of ethics. So, for example, realists think that there is an objective fact of the matter about what is right and what is wrong, and we can disagree about that and be wrong about that. And when we talk about probabilities, this is the same as in science. This is a kind of probability of being right or wrong depending on what the objective truth is, right? And then anti-realists think, no, there is no objective moral reality. Morality is a social construct. And so when we talk about ethics or disagree about ethics, we are not really disagreeing about an objective fact. We are instead expressing different beliefs and values and preferences. And from that perspective, talking about these issues and these probabilities is kind of placing a bet or estimating the probability that in the fullness of time, if I was really able to sit with this issue for a long time and stress test my beliefs and values and intuitions and judgments, that this would be the view that I end up arriving at with like full information and ideal coherence. Now, I personally tend a little bit more towards the anti-realist side. I think that there is not an objective fact of the matter. But I really do value the project of like thinking together about what do we most deeply believe and value, and how might new information or new arguments sort of put pressure on those beliefs and values and lead us to revise them. And so when I offer these arguments and these probabilities, I do it in that spirit. But I think everything that we say can also be interpreted in a realist way and work equally well.
Unmuted. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot that comes down to semantics when it comes to ethics and philosophy. Uh,
Hmm.
I guess I'd just say, and I don't want to go too back and forth about this, is if you're going to be stress testing your views on or the what counts as significant in terms of like well-being, or what makes something morally significant, you're going to be stress testing it against reality, because that's all there really is. I don't think there's a separate world. Like David Chalmers thinks that the mind is sort of dependent on the brain, but it's not physical at all. I'm a
Mm.
hardline physicalist, right? But I
Hmm.
mean, maybe I'm wrong. So yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, but when you're stress testing something, it's got to be tested against something that's either real, that's part of the physical world, or real in that part of the physical world and part of the mental world. And so
Hmm.
when I talk moral realism, I'm not just talking about the code for ethics being written down in the universe. It's more like
Hmm.
what are stance independent um, arguments that are true, regardless
Hmm.
of whoever barracks for them or not.
Yeah.
That we could converge on. We may not know those, and we may not
Yeah.
have access to those, but if there are those truths out there, and
Hmm.
they're at least detectable, maybe we can navigate or approximate them in some way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is an interesting connection between meta ethics and these pretty practical issues with consciousness and moral status.
Do you think AI welfare can slow down or should slow down accelerationism? Is that like AI safety?
Hmm.
People
Hmm.
often argue
Hmm.
that we should slow down AI development. Would you
Yeah.
say that this is another argument that favors slowing down AI development?
Oh, 100%. I think that the case for slowing down and pausing AI development for the foreseeable future is overdetermined at this point. We ought to do that because of harms that we already see from AI systems. We ought to do that because of AI safety risks for humans and other animals. And now we ought to do that because of AI welfare risks too. And instead of racing into the creation of these incredibly like alien, incredibly powerful, incredibly potentially vulnerable beings, instead of racing into the creation of these beings, we really ought to pause and think about what are we creating, and how can we ensure that this technology, if we go further, when we go further, how can we ensure that this technology can be beneficial, but then also safe for humans and animals and potentially the AI systems themselves? Now, with that said, we also live in the real world, and we recognize that even AI companies that are highly motivated by AI safety, for example, they are caught in a global coordination problem, a global collective action problem, where a lot of actors are racing toward the development of artificial general intelligence, whether we like it or not. And so we also need to really be thinking about global governments and how to solve that coordination problem and collective action problem, because otherwise, even companies that are very concerned about safety and welfare might still think, well, the best role they can play is to still participate in the race towards artificial general intelligence to try to nudge the race in a slightly better direction for humans and animals and AI systems. So, yes, I think we should continue to say we ought to slow or pause the technology if we can. But then I think we should also try to provide some context and guidance for AI companies who judge that their best move is to keep going, but try to do it more safely and try to get the industry to do it more safely. And in that spirit, we make the recommendations that we make here. If you are going to move forward, if the industry in general is going to move forward, then they can at least start by acknowledging, assessing, and preparing so that we can be like a little bit more likely to be able to assess these issues responsibly when the time comes.
I think most people today would sort of balk at the idea of getting services from a company that has slaves, right? A lot of people don't buy jewelry with like rubies mined in Myanmar, for instance, because of the fact that it comes from slavery. Or there has been, yeah, okay. And also, people buy ethically sourced meat or
Hmm.
free range eggs, for instance. But when it comes to AI welfare, people might just go, "Oh, why are we talking about this? You know what I mean? That people
Yeah.
might have I guess a knee-jerk reaction to the idea
Yep.
that we should be taking this seriously at all, and
Oh,
aren't
sure.
really get willing to give the headspace to think about the arguments in detail. They're just they're just going on intuition. They
Hmm.
think that AI is just as morally relevant as a toaster,
Hmm.
and yes, who cares, sort of thing, right? Why should I even think about this? Or you like the instant they might instantly think that it's just silly, and anybody who thinks about this is just weird and silly, and I'm
Yeah.
just blocking from now on. I'm not even going to think about that. Before they
Yeah.
get to that stage, before they get to this like dismissal stage, how do you get in there and get them sort of interested? How do you
Yeah.
bypass this I guess bias
Hmm.
against this weird sounding idea?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways that you can do it. One is you can point out the kinds of biases that might be affecting our judgment here. We of course do have a preference for beings who look like us and act like us, and so on and so forth. But beyond that, I think you can use real life and fictional examples to make the issue vivid and make the issue intuitive for people. So, for example, you can note that we agree, or at least many of us agree, that factory farming is problematic in part because of the way that it treats clearly now sentient mammals or vertebrates like cows and pigs and chickens and fishes. But of course, part of why we have this industry is that we had a different and more dismissive attitude when we started to scale it up decades ago. And if only we had thought in advance a little bit more. And if only we had taken seriously at least the possibility of consciousness in these beings and the possible harms that could come from developing this industry, then we might have been able to take a different trajectory that would have been better for humans and animals and the environment at the same time. But now that we have developed the industry, we are stuck in it. And even if we committed to dismantling it today, it would take decades and decades to do that responsibly. And, we can now perceive some of those dynamics, not only with like insect farming and other kinds of invertebrate farming, but also with AI development and deployment. That same eagerness to scale up this new use of very psychologically sophisticated non-humans, and that same dismissiveness based on kind of superficial external appearances. So I think we can use this historical example for animals where we now are quite confident that they are conscious and can suffer as a kind of cautionary tale. And we can also use thought experiments of various kinds. Like in my book, I offer a thought experiment where you and your roommate go to get genetic tests, and to your surprise you discover your roommate turns out to be and your roommate discovers that your roommate turns out to be a Westworld style robot. And then the question is, wow, you always thought this was a human, and now you realize the individual you are living with is a Westworld style robot, but you like still come home at the end of the day and like talk about your work day and your relationships and like support each other and so on. Are you really just going to start instrumentalizing this individual to the extent you can get away with it now that you realize that they are made out of silicon based chips instead of carbon based cells? Or are you going to give them the benefit of the doubt because they still look and act the same exact way? They still have the same interests and hopes and fears that you have, at least as far as you can tell, and you feel a little unsure. So are you going to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And then a final thought experiment is what happens if the shoe is on the other foot. AI might become more powerful than us at some point. If AI does become more powerful than us, with what values and principles do we hope AI will treat us? Do we want AI to decide, well, I can do whatever I want to them because they are made out of different materials than me? And how could something made out of meat be conscious? Or do we want AI to say, nah, you know what? I should still treat these individuals with, consideration and respect and compassion. I might not be sure if something made out of meat can be conscious, but I am also not sure that something out of meat cannot be conscious. So I ought to err on the side of caution and treat them well. And if that is how we want AI to treat us when they take power, then maybe to be consistent, we should treat AI that way while we hold power. So those are some arguments that I found useful with people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it comes to sort of nudging AI to be more friendly, I guess for me, a lot of it does come down to how we're training it, how we're training its values. And if there's a
Yeah,
lot of literature out there which is dismissive of AI welfare or dismissive of non-human welfare, then it might naturally come to conclude that whatever species it belongs to, then that's the circle on which its concern ends. And you've written a
yeah,
book called The Moral Circle, actually.
yeah.
Why
That's
not
right.
just give us like a quick rundown on what the moral circle is and why it applies? Yeah, and how it applies,
Sure.
what the metaphor is.
Yeah, sure. So the book is about the moral circle, which is our kind of conception of the moral community. So who to whom are we accountable? To whom do we have responsibilities? And as you and I have been discussing for most of human history, we've had, especially in the West, a quite narrow conception of the moral circle, extending consideration only to select humans, maybe the occasional charismatic companion animal. But we now recognize, at least many of us do, that we should go much farther. We should extend consideration to all humans and many animals, at least mammals and birds to an extent. And so this book asks, should we go farther still? And it argues, uh-oh, yeah, we should go way farther, way faster than even many philosophers appreciate, because the appropriate question to ask is not which beings matter, nor which beings probably matter, but rather, as we've been saying with AI today, which beings have a reasonable, non negligible chance of mattering. And once you realize that that is the standard for at least inclusion in the moral circle, for at least a little bit of consideration in the spirit of caution and humility, then we realize that a lot of beings meet that standard. And that at least includes all vertebrates, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fishes, many invertebrates, cephalopod mollusks like octopuses, decapod crustaceans like lobsters, even insects like ants and bees, and some near future AI systems for the reasons we've discussed in this conversation. And in my view, all of those beings definitely have a non-negligible chance of mattering based on the information and arguments currently available. And really where the action is with like plants and fungi and microscopic organisms. I think that is where there can be kind of reasonable disagreement about whether they make the cut. But that means more than a quintillion individuals alive at any given time merit at
Hmm,
least a little tiny bit of consideration. And that just
hmm,
raises a lot of pressing questions. And it forces us to confront what happens when we have like huge responsibilities to the non-human world, but then also like huge limitations on our knowledge and power and political will. What do we do? How do we move forward as a society when we owe the non-human world so much, yet we know so little about what they need? We have so little capacity and infrastructure and institutions for giving them what they need, and we have so little political will for even acting on the knowledge and with the capacity that we have. And so the book is about charting a way forward given those pretty tough issues.
hmm. Definitely. Look, how about an adversarial question? What do
Go for it.
you think is the most convincing objection to the idea that AI could never be sentient or morally relevant?
Do you mean the most convincing objection to the idea that AI could be sentient or morally relevant? Or
Yes,
the
yeah.
most,
Not
okay,
not that
cool,
it
cool, cool.
is. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
that it ever could be, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
that it's to say that it's impossible for AI.
Right.
So like it's just yeah. What's the most strongest argument you've ever come across,
Mhm.
or the most convincing? Maybe not
Yeah.
necessarily strong philosophically, but the most convincing.
Right. I think it would be a combination of ethical and scientific arguments. Ethically, it would be an argument that sentience is required for moral significance. So being able to consciously experience positive and negative states like pleasure and pain and happiness and suffering, coupled with the scientific view that sentience requires not only like broad capacities for perception and attention and so on, but also like the specific kinds of chemical and electrical signals that you can find in carbon-based brains, but not in silicon-based chips, at least on current architectures, coupled with the view that the path of AI will slow down or stall from here, that we are not going to have some major breakthrough that brings us to some new architecture that more closely mimics the chemical and electrical signals of human and animal brains, that we are stuck with the current transistor based architecture like forever. So if you can, I think those are all plausible. I think the view that sentience is required for moral standing is incredibly plausible. Like, I think that view is probably correct. Uh, the view that consciousness, sentience requires the specific chemical and electrical signals that we find in human and animal brains, I might not think that view is very likely to be correct, but I do think that that view is reasonable. And I recognize that very smart people like Peter Godfrey Smith endorse it. And then the view that AI development will stall from here and that the current transistor-based architecture is here to stay. Who knows? So that to me is the strongest case for it will never happen. And actually, the only reason why I think we should take AI welfare seriously is just that I think we're not in a position to be certain that all three of those views are correct at the same time right now.
Hmm.
Unless and until we have certainty that all three of those views are correct at the same time, we gotta look into the issue a little bit further just in case.
Yeah, yeah. That's great answer, by the way. Uh, so how do we balance the risk of false positives, that is, treating non-sentient AI as morally significant, versus the false negatives, overlooking morally significant AI? Now, you spoke about just this in your talk, but give us some
Hmm.
more concrete examples of how this might play out in
Yeah.
the real world.
Yeah, so one possible difference between animals and AI, and I still feel a little bit unsure about this, but one possible difference is that with animals there might be a stronger case for the idea that false negatives are worse than false positives as a general
Mm,
matter. That the risk of mistakenly treating a subject like an object is worse. Than the risk of mistakenly treating an object like a subject, both more likely and more severe when it happens. But with AI, because of the huge stakes here, because we could be diverting lots of resources towards these huge populations of digital minds, because we could be liberating them and empowering them to harm us and other animals in various ways. The stakes are higher for false positives, and then that makes it at least a little bit less clear whether false negatives are generally worse than false positives. So how do we balance them? Well, first of all, we have to develop better frameworks for assessing, estimating the probability and severity of false positives and negatives in this domain. But setting that aside, we can use tools like expected value reasoning and
mm,
also risk thresholds to kind of strike a balance. So according to expected value reasoning, we would not simply err on the side of treating them as having like full and equal moral standing when in doubt. Instead,
mm.
we would do what we often do, which is multiply the probability of moral significance by the magnitude of moral significance. And then you would treat the product of that equation as the kind of expected amount of moral significance they have. And you would prioritize accordingly. So, for example, if a house is burning down and I can either save an elephant or an ant or like a simple little robot ant, then, maybe I can use probabilities to break the tie, right? Like an elephant is more likely to matter than the ant, and the ant is more likely to matter than the robot ant. And I can treat them all as potentially significant while still using probabilities to break a tie and priority set accordingly. Now there are downsides to that, but that could be one way of striking a balance. And then another is setting a risk threshold. So any expert in any policy domain agrees that a 1 in 1,000 chance of a grave harm merits at least a little bit of consideration, right? But
hmm
people disagree about whether like a 1 in 1 million or 1 in 1 billion or 1 in 1 trillion or 1 in 1 quadrillion uh, a risk of grave harm merits any consideration at all. And if you were really worried about like astronomically low chance of astronomically huge populations mattering, if you were really concerned about that, like swamping other factors in your decision making, you could consider setting a risk threshold like below 1 in 1,000 and just kind of cut off those lower probabilities. Now, there too, there are downsides, but those are both ways you could strike a balance if you really were worried both about the false positives and the false negatives.
Excellent answer again. Wow, you know your stuff. Look, there's to some degree, the neuroscience of what counts as neurological correlates to moral relevance is a little bit cloudy. What sort of research programs and how much money should we be spending on them to
Yeah,
try and get more clear to I
yeah,
guess like clear up the fog of war, so to speak? Uh,
yeah.
how much ideally, I mean, like how much of GDP of America and or Europe and Australia and Asia should we be spending on understanding the markers to a
Yeah,
more
yeah.
fine and clear degree for convincing reasons,
hmm
for reasons of convincing people, but also for research reasons directly.
Yeah, great question. I do think we should be investing much more in finding the right markers. There are really difficult questions about, first of all, what are the markers according to various theories and how much weight should we give them? Also, how fine grained versus coarse grained should they be? Like if you describe markers associated with perception, attention, learning, memory generally enough in a coarse grained enough way, then those are trivially satisfied not only by
Mm,
current AI systems but by like plants and fungi and microscopic organisms. But if you make them like maximally fine grained, now all of a sudden you are perhaps arbitrarily requiring like the exact form they take in human brains, and that might be too far in the other direction. So figuring out a principled, non-arbitrary way to like specify how sort of fine-grained the description should be when you go and look for the markers without being unduly permissive, but also without being unduly like anthropocentric and restrictive. I think that is
mm,
just a really tough philosophical question. So we need to do more philosophical research on that, while then doing a lot more scientific research about which beings possess the actual markers we then specify. Now, in
mm,
science of animal consciousness, with my colleagues Kristen Andrews and Jonathan Birch. They organized the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness with me in 2024. Part
mm,
of what we have emphasized in a recent perspective in Science magazine is that we need to become less reliant on pain markers and start looking for markers with positive affect, like joy. There are a lot of good ones we can be looking for, and that would be better ethically, but also lead to new progress scientifically. And we can be
mm.
looking for more markers of perceptual consciousness, not just markers of affective consciousness. And then that can shed light on new dimensions of consciousness, and it can similarly be
Yeah.
non-invasive and not harmful. And with AI, we just need to innovate for behavioral markers, we need to innovate for architectural markers. I won't give you a number of GDP that should be allocated towards it. For now, I will simply note that there are tens of people working on this incredibly important and difficult question. And so we could easily increase that by a couple of orders of magnitude without putting a dent in how much money or how many people are focusing on really pressing questions in other areas. So I would
Mm,
suggest that we increase investments so that there are at least like 1,000 people globally working on
mm,
this question, which is
mm.
already going to be a serious push. And then we can start to handle the tougher conversations about like how to calibrate between AI welfare and AI safety and animal welfare and climate change and like blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that's right. And, trying to find that Goldilocks zone between
Yeah.
fine-grainedness and coarse-grainedness of observability. Look, for my own selfish curiosity, I'd love to know, to have more of an empirical understanding of how consciousness works and what's really going on inside. I think, this is one of the things that philosophers and people in general have been questioning for so long. The seat of experience, right, that we
Yeah.
have inside our brains, arguably. But yes,
Hmm.
I mean, people have been wondering about how this works and have made lots of sort of hypotheses about how it all works. Be just great to know, right? I want
Yeah.
grounded hypotheses. That's what I want. But this is my
Yeah.
selfish curiosity speaking.
Oh,
But
yeah. I mean,
I think it's useful.
oh,
I'm sorry.
totally. I mean, this is both practically incredibly like urgent and pressing and like
Yeah.
theoretically just incredibly like interesting and important. Like it really is one of those foundational questions that will really improve our understanding of ourselves and the universe. And so I think for all kinds of reasons we ought to be investing more in it.
You brought up aligning AI safety with AI welfare. Do you want to delve into that a bit more? I mean, how could
Hmm.
AI alignment be sort of reframed in such a way
Yeah.
that convinces AI safety people to also be convinced about AI
Hmm.
welfare? Yeah.
Yeah, so alignment is often thought of as one of the most promising strategies for achieving AI safety. And so roughly alignment means aligning the beliefs and values and goals of AI systems with the beliefs and values and goals of humans. And if we could achieve alignment between humans and AI systems, then that could by itself be a quite robust solution for both AI safety and AI welfare, because it would mean that we have a kind of meeting of the minds, like a shared understanding with AI systems about like what to do and how to live. And that would mean we could coexist peacefully and harmoniously and in a way that benefits everybody without having to put a bunch of additional constraints on AI systems that they might then suffer from and seek to escape and then punish us for and so on, right? And so if alignment can be achieved, then the need to box them and like keep them in captivity or to like surveil them and like track their every move and be prepared to like pull the plug at any moment, the need for a lot of that might fall away, and we could just treat them like we would treat each other, like presume the best, like have some safeguards, but in a way that is compatible with us all pursuing our goals and meeting our needs. And again, as my colleagues Rob Long and Kathleen Finlinson and others at Elios AI point out, that just does seem good, robustly good across the board. This is what we aspire for in human societies, finding ways to like live and let live in a kind of co-beneficial society where we all like get along and help each other out. And if we could build that same kind of like collaborative relationship with powerful AI systems instead of an adversarial one where we have like different goals, and so we have to do all this bad stuff to them to keep them in line, and then they like do what they can to deceive us and break free. That would just be better. Now there are still ethical questions that arise here. Like in general, is it ethically permissible to create an incredibly intelligent, powerful being and force them to desire nothing more than serving you? That there at least some ethical issue here, even if alignment can succeed. But still, it is a very promising avenue for research for both safety and welfare, and I think we should pursue it aggressively while also asking some of those other ethical questions.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that was discussed earlier, I've been thinking about like at Future Day, at Future Days, is the well, coherent extrapolated volition and direct normativity, and that is, are we meant to be aligning to what humans value now, or are we meant to be aligning to
Yeah,
what we would ideally value, or some sort of objective sense of that? But I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if we can
yeah,
spend hours talking about it, but what I will bring up is the Citizens Assembly, right?
yeah.
Now, you said like a random distribution of people. Now,
Hmm.
it might be that the random distribution of people aren't qualified to
Hmm.
make the right judgments.
Hmm.
Some argue that, it could be a merit-based citizens' assembly or assembly of
Yeah.
experts in certain areas with
Hmm.
a random distribution as well. I don't know. And
Hmm.
the idea is that it's similar to what Nick Bostrom writes about in his book Superintelligence, that who gets to be the extrapolation base. I think
Hmm.
what goes into the citizens' assembly in trying to debate what counts as AI ethics and what counts as moral consideration and whether AI should be considered morally relevant, we need to be really careful about what goes into that citizens' assembly. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
extrapolation base or the citizens' assembly could be biased.
Hmm. Yes, of course, right? These are, of course, all going to be imperfect procedures, and we need to take them all with a healthy pinch of salt.
Hmm.
With that said, part of the promise of citizens assemblies is that they have been useful for cutting through the noise and making
Hmm.
recommendations directly to decision makers that go beyond what the decision makers would have done on their own. And citizen assemblies in governmental contexts have been useful for helping governments to get like democratically legitimate input on what counts as a reasonable proportionate way to mitigate risks associated with climate change for future generations or these other tough societal issues. And kind of as with juries, we find that even though like a lot of people are ignorant and a lot of people are biased and so on, we do find that when a group of randomly selected citizens comes together and they talk about issues in an open-ended way with experts and are given facts by the experts, but then asked to deliberate about what is reasonable and proportionate in light of the facts, we find that they often do come to quite thoughtful and reasonable decisions and input. And then, of course, there would be a safeguard because what they deliver is non-binding input. There is no like pre-commitment to acting on the advice of the assemblies, but they can give you some perspective about what the people think, and then you can take that into account as a decision maker. And if anybody's interested in reading more about this, Jonathan Birch writes a lot about it in his new book, The Edge of Sentience, about how citizens' assemblies can be useful for providing public input and expert input about these difficult questions for animals and AI, for example. But I will just maybe close this answer by reinforcing the original observation that led to your question, which is that part of the difficulty with AI alignment is that it is not obvious with what AI systems should be aligned because humans obviously have all kinds of different beliefs and values and goals, and our own beliefs and values and goals are themselves subject to bias and ignorance and our works in progress. And so AI companies and governments, they are in a difficult predicament where to the extent that you just anchor to our own current beliefs and desires and practices, that'll be an incoherent mess and it probably will reflect all kinds of bad biases and oppressions and insofar as you look beyond them, trying to anticipate what the correct ones are or what they might be in the fullness of time, now your AI development strategies are becoming a little bit more subject to your own whims or your own views, or are becoming less democratically legitimate, and that just is a difficult place to be for AI companies. So yeah, just a
Hmm.
difficult tension that should not be overlooked.
Yeah, definitely. I guess a question that I just thought of just then is that people are often looking at AI and they're worried that it's going to take over the world. And so
Right.
debates about the moral significance of AI might be viewed by them as a stepping stone to them getting legitimate power. Okay, as
Hmm.
soon as we give them moral patienthood, it's a slippery slope to moral actorhood, right? And
Hmm.
so maybe they don't they want humans to be in control for the whole time and all eternity, or they, this species dominance issue.
Yeah.
How would you address this concern that if people think that we shouldn't be considering the moral value of AI because it is a
Yeah.
slippery slope to us losing the being dethroned as being the at the top of the food chain?
Yeah, I think that is a serious risk, and this is part of why I said before that I think that the risks associated with false negatives and false positives are a little bit more balanced in the AI
Hmm.
case than in the animal case, because in the AI case you do have this additional significant risk associated with false positives, which is that you could not only be empowering them, but doing it for no good reason.
Hmm.
And we want to be very careful before we do that. Now, I think that is not a good argument for building potentially highly intelligent and highly vulnerable AI systems and then forcing them to experience suffering and death and so on in service of humans. I think that is either a good reason to create them and then find ways to peacefully coexist with them if possible, or to not create them at all. But if you really are just concerned that there will be an intractable conflict between AI safety and AI welfare, which I'm not convinced yet that there will be, but if you were really convinced that there would be, then that would just be all the more reason to slow down or pause AI development. What we should not do is build systems that matter and then treat them as though they don't matter because we're worried about ourselves.
Hmm. Yep. You were worried about treating AIs well at the expense of our own goals and aspirations. So,
Hmm.
look, I've noticed that at least in my small sample set of what's going on in the world, there has been a lot more attention on AI consciousness just recently.
Hmm.
And but what about you? You've got your feelers out there.
Hmm.
How do what's your sense of the general vibe at the moment, and where do you think it's drifting? Do you think it's
Hmm.
drifting towards being concerned about AI welfare? Do you think it's drifting in a positive direction or like a negative direction? What do you think?
Yeah.
Where's the general vibe going across the population of the
Yeah,
world?
I mean, I will note, and by the way, I should say I need to go at the half hour mark, so this might
No
need
problem.
to be
Yes,
the last question, but
cool, cool.
thank you again to you and to everybody for tuning in and watching this later on. So I, of course, only have my perspective, and that is going to not be an impartial perspective because I have been doing more work on this topic myself. So, of course, I have also been hearing from people who are interested in this topic and seeing more. So my experience has been that there has been significantly more interest expressed to me about this topic and coming across my radar. But of course, there might be a selection effect there, and I want to take that with a grain of salt. With that said, I have been mildly encouraged. So when we released our report in 2024, for example, that did coincide with Anthropic acknowledging they had hired Kyle Fish to be their first full-time AI welfare researcher. It also coincided with some media coverage of both the report and the hire, and a lot of it was open-minded and thoughtful from serious places like The Hill and The Times and The Guardian and Nature and so on and so forth. And I think that signifies something. I think it signifies that people, at least some people, are starting to take the issue seriously in exactly the spirit that we were suggesting. Now, that does not mean that we are like gradually building momentum towards like societal consensus about taking AI
Mm,
welfare seriously. I think what early survey data shows is that what would be positive progress is basically AI welfare becoming like what animal welfare was 20 years ago, where like it now is kind of on some people's radar, and some people are paying lip service to the importance of the issue, and like very all too slowly building momentum in the direction of doing something, but not in a way that is keeping up with the pace of the development of the technology. So I think that
mm,
probably is where we are headed. And again, this is
mm,
where we were previously with animal welfare. And that will be too bad because, as with animal welfare, it will not be enough to really address the issue. But it might just be that this is the path that it needs to take, that you have to go through these stages before you really have something like a comprehensive and effective policy. So just trying to take it one step at a time, but I'm mildly encouraged by what we've seen so far.
Well, Jeff, it's been wonderful having you on the channel again, and happy Future Day, and well, awesome work you're doing. So really, hats off to you and your colleagues, and do keep up the great work. So thanks so much
Well,
for your
thank you so
time.
much. And I appreciate everything you're doing on this too. So thanks again. And yeah, looking forward to talking more in the future. All right. Bye, everybody.
Cheers.